But you, man of God, flee from all of this and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. That's pretty straightforward admonition. First of all, flee from, run from, get away from the things that he had written previously, and specifically, I've said it every time, seems like, what the direct antecedent of that has to do with the idea that godliness is a means toward financial gain, which it is absolutely not. Instead, and Paul, by the way, you got to remember, just think back to what Paul wrote about that. He didn't have anything soft to say about that idea. It was all direct and pretty unmistakable, in my opinion, completely unmistakable. So anyway, now he says, instead of that, pursue, chase, go after 6 things: righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. And I talked a lot for about 15 minutes and 10 seconds last time about love. And it's such a huge subject that that's not near enough time to cover it. I'm going to kind of camp out on that idea for a while now. Our ideas of love are not really what the readers of the New Testament had in mind when Paul talked about love. My favorite author, C.S. Lewis, wrote a book called The Four Loves, and in it he takes the 4 most used words in the Greek for love. Eros, which is physical, even sensual love. Phileo, brotherly love. Agape, which is God's absolute, unconditional, altruistic love. And let me think, what was the 4th one? It's not brotherly love, but it's friendship love. Anyway, he spends a whole book explaining from a language point of view the ideas of love in Greek culture. And by the time Paul wrote, it was a Roman culture, but it was a Greco-Roman culture. Yes, Roman was Latin was spoken across the empire, but the language, common language of business, the common language of commerce and academia was Greek. The New Testament was written in Greek. It's interesting that this word here that Paul uses is agape. And one of the very interesting things about agape is that the only place in classical Greek literature that agape appears is the New Testament. This is a strictly New Testament word, a strictly Christian word to describe God's love for us, humanity. We struggle on lots of levels to be able to get our hands around, wrap our brain around the idea of unconditional love. Almost no one has unconditional love for almost anyone. Did I make that convoluted enough? Unconditional love is very difficult. I think the closest that I've ever been able to connect that is a parental love. The kind of love I have, and grandparental love for my kids and my grandkids. They can hurt me, they can disappoint me, they can Uh, and yet, I don't know. It'd be hard for me to imagine that they could make me not love them. All right. Last time I pointed to this definition of love. Love is doing for the other person what they really need, not what they want, not even what I want to do for them. We're talking about what do they really need. Well, in order to know what another person needs, you really have to know them well. And you also have to be a student of life. For us, our textbook for understanding the difference between needs and wants really comes down to our observation of human experience and human nature, using the scripture as the lens that we look at. We look through the lens of scripture to interpret human nature and human needs. Often what happens is people will look at scripture through the lens of what they think they need and what they look around and think the rest of the world needs. And most of the time, maybe that's not fair, but much of the time, we don't know what we need. We only know what we want. And there's a little bit of the time that we don't even know what we want. We're just, whatever it is, we don't want that's not what I want. We're kind of a mixed up bunch of crazy people sometimes. Love, doing for the other person what they really need. Well, everybody is going to have to wrestle that one down for themselves. I want to talk about this in a couple of different specific contexts. I want to begin by thinking out loud about marriage. Love, you don't really have a vibrant, thriving marriage relationship without love. Now, I will say that in itself is a bit cultural. And here's what I mean by that. We're living in an age, and it's only been, probably a couple of hundred, maybe 250 years in all of human history, that marriage was a matter of two people deciding they are in love with each other and they want to get married. In times previous, and in places around the world today even, you didn't have a choice. You were promised by your parents to another set of parents for their child, either as the husband or the wife. And this was often done in very early childhood, sometimes at birth. So that the idea of marrying for love it doesn't appear. You marry because your parents made the commitment, and either you endure that relationship or you come to develop affection and love for your spouse, which is one of the reasons why divorce was very, very low. The incidence of divorce was very low for almost all of human history. Now, there's a second reason why divorce was, in terms of its occurrence, very low, is because for a long millennium, more than one or two millennia, multiple spouses were permitted, but the wife was not permitted to have multiple husbands. The husband was permitted to have multiple wives. There's not time to go into the whole gender dominance aspect of history. But what I mainly want to point up is when people read this word or heard this word in Paul's encouragement to Timothy, or command, love, they were not thinking about romantic love. Because romantic love did exist, but romantic love was not the catalyst for marriage in the first century. The catalyst for marriage was a commitment reached and an agreement reached on the basis of that commitment for two people to be bound by marriage. Sometimes it was about the wealth of the bride and her family. Sometimes it was about a convenience factor, but it almost wasn't about the feeling of love. And when Paul connects it as agape love, then it becomes, the boundaries become more narrow, okay? In a marriage, agape love means this is an unselfish love. This truly means I am most interested in my spouse's welfare and good. And so I will make choices that will be difficult for me because they are good for my spouse. If marriages could be conducted on that basis, it's hard for me to imagine that we would have this overwhelming statistical thing about divorce in our culture. And really, isn't that what, let me just rephrase that. This is what Paul writes about in Ephesians chapter 5, my favorite passage about marriage in all of literature, but especially in the Bible, where in verse 21, Paul says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Submitting to one another means I want what's best for you. And you want what's best for me. When these things happen, one of the frustrating marriage counseling experiences I've had was with the husband. The wife was totally uninterested and unwilling to come to counseling, and I'm still trying to figure out why the guy came, other than he had been referred by one of his AA brethren. He was stuck on the 50-50 model for marriage. And when I promoted, and I didn't just promote it, I pushed it, the idea that if you want to have a biblical marriage, 50-50 has to go away. Because submit to one another out of reverence for Christ has nothing to do with 50-50. And there's lots of reasons for that. One has to do with you never really do 50% when you think you have. You can't quantify that, right? And whoever your spouse is, you might think they're doing 30% when they're probably actually doing 45%. But it's not 50. 50-50 will always leave a gap. And so that's why Paul writes, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, so that you get this 100%. When I am submitting my will and she is submitting her will, we're going to have overlap. Well, I mean, I can go on and on a long time about that, but he decided, no, this isn't doing me any good. I'm done. I'll let you know if I need you. Okay? I can just say, you can survive this marriage. You've survived it already this long. Can you thrive? I don't think so. You can't thrive on a 50-50 basis. See, agape is not 50-50. Agape love, God's agape love, does not say, you do this much and I'll do this much. God's agape love says, I'll do all of it. I'll go the entire way. When I can have that kind of love, that's when life works the best. And that's what Paul told Timothy to pursue. Now, there's one other thing about love that we got to talk about, and that has to do with the difference between an emotion and an intention. And we'll do that next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.